Kishore Mahbuhani is the diplomat, academic, and author whose books help us understand and navigate the unfamiliar shifts overwhelming the world. Has China Won is his new release about a country and a people he knows well and the challenge it presents to American primacy. This he describes as the foremost contest of the 21st century, where the US, he writes, has abandoned multilateralism while China embraces it. I'm James Chau. Through this year, I've spoken to authors from Admiral Bill Owens to Kishore Mahbuhani to discuss their writing and the experiences that shaped their viewpoints.
I should emphasize, for example, my book, Has the West Lost It, is not an anti-Western book. The goal of my book is actually to help the West adjust to a new world. And I'm telling the Western countries, it is in their interest to make a U-turn and adopt what I say is a new 3M formula, minimalist, multilateral, Machiavellian. So I'm actually giving the West good advice on how to deal with a different world. Similarly, my book on US-China relations, Has China Won, is designed to help prevent a worst-case outcome in the US-China relationship, where there's a complete split between US and China, which I think will be disastrous for the US and disastrous for China too. But unfortunately, many people in the United States have launched a contest in China against China without thinking through the long-term consequences of doing so. So I'm saying stop, think twice, think where you have common interests before you go right ahead and assume that you can just defeat China as easily as you defeated Soviet Union, because China is not the Soviet Union.
What does that mean? I did an interview with an American military general recently, and he said, China's not Russia. It's just trying to work with the world sometimes on its own terms, but it's not necessarily anything more than that. Do people tend to think the worst of China? Where does that come from?
If you read my book, you'll find that it's actually quite surprising that the United States of America, which has the best funded strategic think tanks in the world, has some of the worst strategic thinking in the world. And I often wonder where the money is going in all these strategic think tanks, because there's a clear void of strategic thinking in America. So once again, the goal of my book is to just get Americans to think very hard about where their real interests lie. So let me give you a concrete example. Is the primary goal of the US government to improve the well-being of the 330 million American people? Or is the primary goal of the US government to preserve the primacy of the United States? So if your goal is to preserve the primacy, the price you are paying is that the well-being of the American people is being undermined. Now, for example, one of the most shocking statistics in America is that almost 2/3 of American families, households, don't have $500 in emergency cash. At a time when the United States has wasted $3 trillion fighting in Iraq that was completely unnecessary. Why don't you take the $3 trillion and instead of fighting in Iraq, give it to American households who need it much more?
You begin your chapter, A More Dangerous World, by referencing your global friends, Latin American, Asian, African, saying that they will be troubled by your call to the West to be cunning. And you have described yourself at the end of your talks as a friend of the West. What would you say when you meet its leaders and sit across from them?
My big advice to China is the same advice I give to America. Don't be overconfident. don't assume you're going to win. Because the United States is a formidable country. The population may be 1/4 the size of China, but if China can tap the best brains from 1.4 billion people, United States can tap the best brains from 6 billion people. The Western readers, especially the liberal Western intellectuals, have developed a one-dimensional view of China, and which is very black and white, black and white. So, for example, the fact that China is run by Chinese Communist Party, right, which it is, they assume that the Chinese Communist Party, therefore, will behave exactly like the Soviet Communist Party. What I try to provide is a three-dimensional view of China for the American and Western intellectuals. And I hope that they will then step back and see that this is a China that they can live with and work with instead of just condemning and denouncing it.
When was the first time you visited China, and what did China feel like in those years?
Well, I first visited China, Beijing, in 1980, exactly 40 years ago. And when I arrived in Beijing, there were no skyscrapers. There were big highways, but no cars, only bicycles. And since I was staying in a guest house not far from Tiananmen, I would go jogging down the little lanes, the hutongs as they call them, and people would be out on the muddy streets with little pails of water, brushing their teeth out in the main street. And it was like a rustic, rural environment right in the heart of Beijing, right? So, and people there couldn't choose what to wear. They all wore Maoist suits. The ladies didn't have colorful dresses. So it was in many ways the exact opposite of what you see in Beijing today. So I have actually personally seen and experienced this dramatic transformation of China. That's why I can speak with great confidence of how far China has come in transforming its society.
You can listen to the whole conversation with Kishore Mahbuhani by going to your preferred podcast platform and searching At Large China US Focus, our series with global thought leaders.